Have you ever talked to someone and 5 minutes later caught yourself thinking, why does this person never move forward in life? Not because they're a bad person, not because they don't have talent, but every year you see them, they're still dealing with the exact same problems. And here's the interesting part. Most of the time, it's not because they don't have money, luck, or opportunities. It's because of a few simple sentences. Sentences some people repeat every single day until they start believing them. In this video, I want to share 6 of those sentences with you, and chances are every one of us has said at least one of them at some point. So make sure you're subscribed, and let's jump into the first one. None of this is my fault. The first sign of a foolish person is that they always have someone ready to blame. Think about it for a second. Some people seem to have an explanation prepared for every problem in their life. No money? The economy's terrible. Stuck in a bad job? It's all about connections. Overweight? It's just my genetics. Never learned a new skill? I never had the time.
Business isn't growing? There aren't enough opportunities where I live. Relationship problems? Good people don't exist anymore. And you know what's funny? Sometimes those excuses are actually true. Maybe the economy really is bad. Maybe your family really didn't support you. Maybe your city really doesn't offer many opportunities. So what's the real problem then? The problem isn't that those things are false. The problem is that none of them changes anything. Not a single thing. Imagine 2 people living in exactly the same city, the same economy, the same environment, the same limitations. 5 years later, one of them is still complaining about life. The other has completely transformed their situation. What's the difference? More intelligence? More luck? Not really. A different mindset.
A foolish person looks for someone to blame. A wise person looks for their next move. A foolish person says, the economy is bad, so there's nothing I can do. A wise person says, okay, the economy's bad, so how can I earn more anyway? A foolish person says, I don't have time to work out. A wise person says, do I have 10 minutes or not? A foolish person says, no one helped me. A wise person says, how can I start with what I already have? Focus. Here's something really important. The moment you hand responsibility for your life over to circumstances, you also hand over your power to change it. Because your brain quietly tells itself, if this isn't my responsibility, then fixing it isn't my responsibility either. And that's exactly where growth stops. There's something I learned way later than I should have. Life doesn't reward people with the best excuses. Life rewards people who keep moving despite their excuses. If I had to sum this sign up in one sentence,
A foolish person finds someone to blame for every problem. A wise person finds the next step. And believe me, that one small difference can create 2 completely different lives a few years down the road. But the second sign is even more dangerous because it makes people think they're right even when they're completely wrong. The second sign of a foolish person is thinking they already know everything. And here's the interesting part. These people usually aren't the least informed people in the room. Sometimes they actually know a thing or two. The problem starts when they believe there's nothing left to learn. You know the type of person I'm talking about. No matter what you say, they've already heard it. You bring up a new idea. Yeah, I already know that. You mention a book. I've read it. You recommend a new skill. I looked into that a long time ago. You offer a solution. That stuff doesn't work. It's like their mind already made its decision. Before they even hear something, they've already rejected it. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone wants to learn tennis. Their coach says, try moving your hand like this. And the person replies, I know. Then they do it wrong again. The coach corrects them, and again they say, I know. Okay, if you know, then why aren't you improving? That's where things become dangerous. Because a lot of people don't actually love learning. They love looking smart, and those 2 things are completely different. A person who wants to look smart usually talks more. A person who is actually smart usually asks more questions. Years ago, I read something that really stuck with me. It said, the moment you think you know everything, your growth stops. And honestly, that's exactly how it works. Because learning starts when you're willing to admit you don't know it all. A foolish person looks for proof that they're already right. A wise person looks for things they still don't know. That's why you'll see successful people with years of experience still reading books, still asking questions, still getting advice, still saying things like, maybe there's something here I haven't seen yet. And ironically, that's exactly why they keep growing, because growth begins with curiosity, not certainty, not ego, curiosity. If I had to sum this sign up in one sentence, a foolish person thinks they've already found all the answers. A wise person is still looking for better questions. But the next sign is even more common. It's a sentence almost every one of us has said at least once. All right, I'll start tomorrow. The third sign of a foolish person is a very short sentence, a sentence almost all of us have said at some point in our lives. I'll start tomorrow. Or maybe one of its cousins. I'll start next Monday. Let me get through this week first. Next month, I'm getting serious. Now just isn't the right time. And the problem isn't saying those words once in a while.
The problem is that some people have been starting tomorrow for years. Have you ever noticed that? Someone says they want to learn a new language. 6 months later, you see them again. They're still talking about learning a new language. Someone else says they want to lose weight. 3 months later, they're saying the exact same thing. Another person says they want to start a business. 2 years later, they're still talking about getting started. It's like some people are in love with the idea of change, but not the actual work of changing. Because thinking about success is easy. Doing the work is hard. Dreaming doesn't make you sweat. Dreaming doesn't make you nervous. Dreaming doesn't risk failure. Taking action does. That's why our brains play a clever little trick on us. Instead of saying, I don't want to do it, it says, I'll do it later. And honestly, that's much more dangerous. Because when you say later, you don't feel guilty.
You tell yourself, I'm not giving up. The time just hasn't come yet. But then next week becomes next month. Next month becomes next year. And before you know it, years have passed and you're still standing in the same place. Always remember this. No successful person ever woke up one morning with perfect motivation. No successful person sat around waiting to feel ready. No successful person waited for the perfect Monday. A foolish person waits for the perfect moment. A wise person starts with an imperfect one. Want to learn a language? Start with 10 minutes today. Want to exercise? Do a few simple movements. Want to read more books? Read a few pages. Want to build a business? Take the very first step. Because a wise person understands something important. A small action today is worth more than a huge plan for tomorrow. Way more. Most people don't fail because they made the wrong decision.
They fail because they never acted on the decision at all. If I had to sum this sign up in one sentence, a foolish person is always waiting for tomorrow to begin. A wise person starts right where they are with whatever they have. But the fourth sign is even more dangerous because it makes every success story look worthless before you even look at it. Successful people only got there because they had connections. The fourth sign of a foolish person is that they dismiss other people's success with just one meaningless sentence. You've definitely heard these lines before. They just had connections. Someone was backing them. They had rich parents. They just got lucky. If I had their setup, I could have done the same. And just like in the first sign, the problem isn't that these statements are always false. Sometimes they're actually true. Some people do have more opportunities. Some have better connections. Some come from wealthier families. This is reality. But here's the question. So what?
Let's assume all these things are true. That person really had connections. They really had money. They really got lucky. What does any of that do for your life? Nothing. Zero. Because you're focusing on stuff you can't control. Notice something interesting? When some people see someone succeed, they immediately look for an external reason to downplay it. Because it makes them feel better. If they said, they succeeded because they worked hard, then they'd have to ask themselves, so why didn't I work hard? And that question isn't easy. So the brain finds a shortcut. It says, they just got lucky. Case closed. But a wise person sees it differently. When they see someone succeed, they don't ask, why them?
They ask, what can I learn from this? That one question changes everything. One person turns someone else's success into jealousy. One person turns it into a lesson. Imagine two people watching a successful athlete. The first says, "It's just genetics." The second says, "Look at how disciplined they trained." The first gains nothing. The second learns something. This small difference creates huge gaps over the years. A foolish person looks for reasons to prove that someone else's success isn't real. A wise person looks for ways to learn from it, because jealousy never improves anyone's life. Learning does. If I had to sum this sign up in one sentence, a foolish person sees someone else's success and says, "They just had an advantage." A wise person says, "What lesson can I take from this?" But the fifth sign might be the most dangerous sentence on this list, a sentence that can keep someone stuck in the same place for years.
I'm just the way I am. The fifth sign of a foolish person is a sentence that sounds completely harmless at first, but it can quietly keep someone stuck for years. What's the sentence? I'm just the way I am. I'm not a morning person. I don't have a good memory. I'm naturally lazy. I'm not really a people person. I've just never been good at things like that. You've definitely heard these before. Maybe you've even said some of them yourself at some point. So what's the problem with these sentences? The problem is that little by little, they stop being explanations. They become identities. And once something becomes part of your identity, changing it gets a lot harder. For example, someone gets embarrassed in public once. Then they tell themselves, "I'm a shy person." Years later, every new opportunity gets blocked by that old label. Or someone tries dieting a few times and fails. Then they say, "I just don't have any willpower."
And from that moment on, every time they try to start again, the same sentence plays in their head. It's like building an invisible prison and becoming your own guard. Here's something important to remember. No baby is born confident. No baby is born disciplined. No baby is born knowing how to negotiate, speak in public, manage money, or build relationships. All of those things are learned. Every single one of them. So when you say, "This is just who I am," you're actually putting a limit on your own growth. Because your brain starts saying, "If that's who I am, then there's no point trying." And that's exactly what makes it dangerous. A foolish person sees their personality like a rock.
I'm not organized yet. Instead of saying, "I can't do it," they say, "I haven't learned it yet." Just that one little word, yet. Sometimes it can completely change the direction of someone's life because it doesn't close the door. It keeps the door open. If I had to sum this sign up in one sentence, a foolish person uses their personality as an excuse. A wise person sees their personality as something they can keep working on. And now we get to the final sign, the one that makes people believe they're the smartest person in the room even when they're wrong. Everybody's stupid except me. The sixth sign of a foolish person is believing that everyone else is the problem. Imagine someone who has issues with their boss. They say, "My boss is an idiot." A few months later, they start having problems with their coworkers. "All my coworkers are toxic."
Then they run into problems with their friends. They say, "There are no decent people anymore." Let me ask you something. If in every story, everyone around you is always the problem, is there any chance that a small part of the problem might be you? That's a question a lot of people refuse to ask themselves because it's hard, really hard. It's much easier to say, "Everyone else sucks," than to admit that maybe we're wrong sometimes too. Maybe sometimes we don't listen very well. Maybe sometimes we judge people too quickly. Maybe sometimes we're not open to feedback. Maybe sometimes we're more interested in being right than getting better. And honestly, that happens to all of us. Me too. You too. Everyone. But this is where the difference between a wise person and a foolish one shows up.
A foolish person gets defensive when they hear an uncomfortable truth. A wise person gets curious. Instead of saying, "No, it's not my fault," they say, "Could there be something I'm not seeing?" That one simple question is powerful because nobody can improve themselves until they're willing to admit they might be wrong. Want to hear something interesting? The smartest people you'll ever meet are usually the least certain.
They say things like, maybe, I could be wrong, what do you think? But some of the most clueless people speak with absolute certainty. It's like there's no doubt anywhere in their mind. And that's the problem, because growth begins the moment healthy doubt enters the conversation. When you're willing to admit you might be wrong, that's when you finally have room to grow. But if you're convinced you're always right, there's nothing left to learn. If I had to sum this sign up in one sentence, a foolish person is always looking for other people's mistakes. A wise person puts themselves under the microscope first.
And now we come to the final sentence, the one that might be more dangerous than all the others, because this one doesn't even try to change. It is what it is. And the final sign of a foolish person is a sentence that might be the most dangerous one on this entire list. At least the other sentences had some kind of movement in them, but this one turns everything off. What's the sentence? It is what it is. I'm too old for that now. That's just how things are. People don't really change. I guess that's my fate. You've probably met people who say things like this whenever the topic of growth, change, or building a better life comes up. It's like they've already surrendered before they even started. They accepted defeat before the fight. They announced the outcome before they even tried. And the worst part is that eventually they start believing their own story. For example, someone tries to lose weight a few times and doesn't get the result they wanted. Then they say, I'll never lose the weight.
Someone else fails in business a few times. Then they say, I'm just not meant to be successful. Someone gets hurt in relationships a few times. Then they say, real love only exists in movies. The problem with these statements is that they turn a limited experience into a permanent rule. Just because something happened a few times, they assume it's going to happen forever. But life doesn't work that way. Nobody has seen the future. Nobody knows where they'll be a year from now. Nobody. A foolish person lets their past define their future. A wise person says, just because I couldn't do it until today doesn't mean I can't do it tomorrow. That's a huge difference. One person says, I failed 5 times, and closes the case. Another person says, I failed 5 times, which means I learned 5 lessons, and keeps going.
The truth is that almost every successful person was discouraged many times before they succeeded. They got knocked down again and again. They were told it's impossible over and over. But they had one thing that made them different. They never believed the sentence, it is what it is. Because they understood that as long as the game isn't over, the final score hasn't been decided. If I had to sum up this final sign in one sentence, a foolish person sees their current situation as their destiny. A wise person sees their current situation as their starting point. And maybe after hearing these 6 sentences, it's worth asking yourself one question. Which one do you repeat the most? Because the truth is, none of us are wise all the time. All of us have said some of these things before. All of us have gotten things wrong. But the moment we become aware of them, we can start changing our direction. And a lot of the time, changing your life doesn't begin with a huge decision. It begins by changing one sentence you repeat to yourself every day.